welcome to our panel here on Less Crime for Less Money. I'm Mark Levin, Director of the Center for Effective Justice at the Texas Public Policy Foundation and Policy Director at our Right on Crime initiative. Thank you for joining us. And we're here today to talk about adult corrections. Of course, as all of you know, Texas has had a great deal of success in the last 5 years or so in terms of reducing both the prison population and, most importantly, reducing the crime rate. We've seen crime in Texas decline at a sharper rate than it has declined nationally, which is very encouraging. And we now, of course, were able to close a prison in Sugar Land, as many of you know, about a year or two ago. And now it looks like we may be able to close additional units going forward because fewer people are committing crimes and fewer people are going to prison. So it's a really exciting time to think about how we can continue the great progress that we've seen here in Texas. And of course, a lot of that is due to some of the outstanding leaders we have in this state. And as all of you know, Jerry Madden, who's with us today, did incredible work in the legislature and really putting Texas on the map nationally as a success story in criminal justice in terms of how to be both tough and smart in this area. And Chairman Whitmire, who couldn't be with us today, has also done tremendous work as well, and I know he will be a great ally during this legislative session. But we've seen an increasing number of legislators, as you'll see here today, take up the mantle on this issue, and that's why it really is an exciting time as we head into next session. So I did want to mention Senator Rodney Ellis was going to be with us today, but unfortunately his 91-year-old father is seriously ill right now, and so he's unable to join us, but he certainly sends his regards. And Ani Yanis Correa with the Texas Criminal Justice Coalition has graciously agreed to take that spot on our panel, and I assure you you will not be disappointed with her. She's been a terrific advocate alongside me and others going back to the early 2000s and deserves much credit for the success we've seen here in the state. So our first speaker today will be Ryan King, who is Research Director for the Public Safety Performance Project at the Pew Center on the States. And he will talk about some of the national trends and really will set the table, I think, for our discussion specifically in terms of the Texas legislative session. And he's the principal investigator and methodologist for Pew's research agenda, which is, as you know, these reports that Pew has put out, 1 in 31, referring to 1 in 31 Americans under correctional control, either prison, probation, parole, and then, of course, 1 in 100 report and prison, and then the national state-by-state recidivism comparison, and most recently the time served study. These and other really outstanding research reports that have such credibility in terms of the data that are presented have really had a major impact across the country in terms of enabling states to improve their corrections policies. He's also the lead researcher at Pew on their juvenile area, which of course we'll have a panel tomorrow on juvenile justice. And but these, as I said, these studies, both in the adult and now in the juvenile area, are really helping to give states the information needed to make better decisions in this area. So please join me in welcoming Ryan King.
Thank you, Mark. And I'd say we actually have the 1 in 31 and the 1 in 100 numbers, which came out in 2008 and 2009, are now updated about 1 in 34 and 1 in about 104, 105. So quite positively, we're seeing nationally the trends that we saw here in Texas leading the way begin to be replicated nationally as the overall prison population has leveled off and has actually begun to decline in the last couple of years in about half the states nationally overall, and then in about half the states. So they're good positive developments, and it is, as Mark said, it's a really great pleasure for me to be here in Texas. This is a state that I work nationally in Washington, D.C. I've been working on this issue for about 12 years, doing research in a number of different angles of the scope and scale of the sentencing and correction systems, and it's been, Texas without a doubt is really a model that we talk about across the country, and I can say that well, also without question that story is quite compelling. So when we go to other states, people are often very interested to hear what's happened in Texas, and those lessons have been portable. So that's been, you should be very pleased with the developments that are going here, and hope with this legislative session kicks off, there'll be a lot more that we can point to going forward. I'm going to talk specifically here today about a study that we just finished that actually came out last year on time served. And I want to give a little bit of a national overview about how time served has changed across the country over the last 20 years. We undertook a first of its kind state-by-state assessment of time served numbers. It may seem a little bit peculiar that those numbers didn't already exist, but for a number of different reasons, we actually did not have a single collection of time served. And why is that important? Why were we interested in studying that? Because there's two factors that affect how many people are in prison. And that is how many people come in the door and how long they stay there. We've seen a lot of research in recent years about who comes in the door and what the admissions are, and we've seen a lot of legislation talking about that. But I think as we move to a conversation about really being able to sustain some of these meaningful declines in prison population across the country, we're going to need to have a conversation about length of stay as well, because length of stay has been a significant contributor to the growth in the prison population across the country. And frankly, we did not have really good data to understand that. So we felt as policymakers, like here in Texas and across the country, are going to be going out and investigating and looking at their prison populations. They're going to really need to have actual data that gives them information, not just on who's coming in the door, but how long they're staying in there and for what types of offenses. And most importantly in this report too, what the impact of that additional length of stay is on public safety. So starting here to give you a little bit of perspective, you can see this graphic to me still never ceases to amaze me nationally. You can see the growth in the prison population, generally flat from the late, about 1924, I believe was the first year that they measured it, all the way into the early 1970s, and as you can see, begins a precipitous increase, and just in the last 20 years, 109% increase nationally in the state prison population. So 700% in the last 4 decades. So this is exactly why we're talking about this. This is why we're here. The sort of trends that you witnessed and experienced in Texas were going on nationally. And these numbers, I think, are, as many may be familiar with them, it's still important to set that context to get a sense of really the scale that we're talking about. So we wanted to get a sense of how time served has contributed to that growth. And I'll give you a quick overview of the data. We use National Corrections Reporting Program data. These are data that the states provide up to the federal agencies, the Bureau of Justice Statistics. So this is official data. It was much easier to get an official collection from the states rather than having to go out and survey states ourselves. We got data from 35 states that reported, representing about 89% of all releases in 2009, so that's a pretty significant portion of the overall prison population, to give you a sense of what we're touching on, and where we get all of the kind of the big states, the Californias, the Texases, the Floridas, their data were represented in there. And we calculated our time served estimates using a 3-year moving average, focusing on first releases. So what that means is recognizing that an average exit cohort for people coming out of prison, it can vary greatly from year to year, because you could have a bunch of long-termers that have been in there for a great deal coming out in 1 year, and then the next year you don't have as many. You see a precipitous decline, and it could suggest something that's going on, and the data might tell a story that really isn't actually there. So we decided to use 3-year moving average data on first releases. So this means these are individuals who were released from prison for the first time for that charge. So these are not people, what we didn't want to do was have the length of stay numbers also have people who have been cycling through. It's an important policy question, but slightly different. We wanted to kind of have, for lack of a better term, kind of the purest measure of a correctional intervention. Let's get a sense of what happens for the people who are coming out the very first time for that particular conviction. Not the first time they may have ever been convicted or in prison in their life, but just on this particular release. And we broke them down by offense type, importantly too, as you will see as I walk through the findings here. So looking through nationally, the length of stay grew about 36% between 1990 and 2009. That's 9 months longer, to a total of about 3 years. So that may not seem like very much, but just keep that number plugged away in your head for a moment, because we're going to go through a couple other findings, and I'm going to give you a sense of what 9 months really means. The sharpest growth was between 1995 and 2000. I think anybody who has followed developments in the last 20 or 30 years won't be surprised. In 1994, we had the federal crime bill. We had a lot of money that went into the states for truth in sentencing. A number of states began at that point were either abolishing parole or making parole much more restrictive. So it's not surprising that we would see that 95 to 2000, that particular period, be the period of sharpest growth. And significant variation by offense type. And that variation you might find interesting, and I'm going to walk you through that in a little bit. So to get a sense by, we looked at violent property and drug offenders. And you can get a sense here, looking at violent, the average time served between 1990 and 2009 grew about 37% for violent and 36% for drug offenders, so about the same rate, and a 24% increase for property. I think we found that quite interesting to see that we had almost an identical, for all intents and purposes, an identical growth in the rate of time served for violent and drug offenders. So you see a little bit of the offense variation, and I think even this is where I, as a person who does national studies looking at state data, want to make crystal clear is that the national numbers are interesting and they're good for conversations, but they often obscure what's going on at the state level. And what we wanted to do at this point and why this data collection was so important was to actually be able to give you a sense and a picture of how the states vary, because it will very much I think reinforce the message that we already know, which is that the changes in the prison population, changes in time served, are directly related to policy changes. And so variations that we may see from state to state to state are not necessarily linked to differential rates of criminal offending, but are often related to the policy decisions of those legislatures. So starting out here, you can get a sense of the big growers. These are states that grew more than 50% between 1990 and 2009. These are the states that grew between 26 and 50% during that time. And you know, I will not be quizzing you at the end of this, so you don't have to memorize. I just wanted you to really get a little bit of a flavor for the direction. Here's states that were about 0 to 25%, the slightly lighter blue, and then we actually had a handful of states that had small declines across offense types. And we actually have these data for offense. This is for all offenses. We have it for offense type 2. I'm not going to drag you through all those. The white states there are states that did not provide data. So the takeaway from here, I think, is that there's really no pattern. There's a great deal of variation going on across all of the states, and I think it's really critically important to understand that it's not certain types of states. We see growth all across the country, different states, different political leadership, different regions. I think here, as I've mentioned, the overall growth issue, you see here are 3 states, Texas is one of them, that had the same growth in time served across all offenses. So you look at those and you think Oregon, Pennsylvania, Texas, all right, they're about 30% growth overall. But when you break it out by offense type, you see very, very different stories. And this is part of the report we try to highlight here. You can see consistent growth across violent offenses, but as you look down on property and drug, this in a place like Oregon, they actually had a decline in time served for property and an increase in drugs. So this really underscores the need to look at time served by offense types, because the overall number is only giving you a part of the story, and I think the variation here among states tells it. Now here's the cost number that I want to lay here before I get swept off the stage. Now I mentioned the 9 months, which may not seem like a lot over the course of 20 years, but what we did is to try to do a little bit of a math here to give you a sense of that scope. So the average cost of 1 month in prison, we calculated in the left, times the 9 months, times the actual time for keeping them in there longer, that 9 months, so that you get the 23,000, that's the 1 month time, the additional 9. So what this says here, this 10.4 billion, in short, is for a state, one single state in one single year in 2009, the total cost just for keeping those individuals there for those additional 9 months was $10 billion, $10.4 billion. So you could say that had they held their time served constant at 1990 levels, they would have spent $10 billion less. That gives you one example of the scale and scope of this. That 10 billion number is the national number. And so let me just say I've run out of time here, and I apologize for that. I do want to just say that in addition to this study, in the back half of this, we spent an extensive amount of time looking at the actual impact of length of stay and public safety, because that's the key component. It costs a lot, but if it's delivering on public safety, that's a whole different conversation. And we have extensive conversation there to show that there is a growing amount of literature out there to suggest that the additional time served for certain offenders is not giving us any additional bang for our buck in terms of time served. So what the research is telling us is we've got more people spending longer times, it's costing us more money, and for certain offenders in prison, it's having very dubious effects on public safety. And so I think the data, what I would like to leave you in the takeaway as you enter the legislative session is to really be thinking about the fact that who in our prison is there? How long are they staying for? And are there certain people in there that don't need to be there as long as they are? Are there changes that we can make? And I think the research very clearly shows that there are changes that we can make where we can actually still hold offenders accountable. We can protect public safety while still controlling corrections costs. Thank you.
Our next speaker is going to be Representative Ralph Sheffield, and he was elected to the Texas House in 2008 to represent District 55, which encompasses the majority of Bell County. He served on 3 committees last session, including Vice Chair of Defense and Veterans Affairs, as well as Energy and Rules Committees. He opened his first restaurant back in 1975. I'm embarrassed to say I've not eaten there. But in 1982, he his own Las Casas restaurant and all-occasion catering based in Temple. So I'm sure you'll get plenty of food for thought. Please welcome Representative Ralph Sheffield.
I really had no intention of giving any kind of speech today, but I wanted to be part of this panel discussion for sure. Let me just start by saying I'd like to thank TPF for the invitation to be here and you guys for your interest in this subject. It is a very important subject to me, I feel like. You know, as a good conservative, small business guy, you heard I've been in business for 37 years. I think we really never had the real discussion on trying to spend some extra money on the front end of our system than the back end. We spend way too much money on the back end versus the front end. And when the appropriators get ready to budget, I believe they need to be looking at programs like the MHMR programs, mental health issues that we have and so forth. And because we have about 25% of our offenders that return to the jail system on a regular basis because of their med problems and because of the fact that really and truly we don't take care of and treating them even when they're in the system as well. And I'll give you a good example of a situation that happened to it was a friend of mine, but we have a regular Bible study every Tuesday at my church, and when I was participating there, before actually I got involved several years ago in the Bible study, because it meets at 7 o'clock in the morning. I'm kind of busy that time of the day, but we had a young man that actually was coming every Tuesday morning for the breakfast and for the study, and next thing we know that he's not showing up. And come to find out, he was a homeless individual, and he didn't show up, and come to find out that he actually wound up doing something stupid. He went off his meds and wound up getting back in the system. And so he would write us letters regularly about, you know, first year and a half or so about being in the system because of what he did, and would write us regularly for some help. He would need some clothes or, you know, odds and ends being in the jail. And so, you know, you think about those kind of real live situations, and even last budget cycle was so hard, they were going to try to cut some of the MHM programs. And I really believe that the discussion needs to be had that where can we spend money on the front end to stop some of the stuff from happening on the back end, because we are spending way too much money on a per day basis for people that are in jail. And also we got offenders out there that when they do go to jail, such as drug or say DWIs and so forth, I believe they probably don't get enough counseling when they're in the system, that really when they get out of the system, they don't fall back in the same habit they had. And I would love to be part of that discussion and see how we could do that to help spend a little extra money on the front end that will greatly save not only the state money on the back end, but also our counties and our cities and also our courts time being tied up to repeat offenders. So that's really my little spiel, and I'd really like to have the discussion on the panel as well, and thank y'all for being here.
Well, our next speaker is going to be Representative James White, and I think many of you have gotten to know Representative White. He served on the Corrections Committee last session and really was a tremendous leader in that capacity. And, you know, it was a wonderful committee to repeatedly be before. They may have gotten tired of me after a while, but we had 3 freshmen, Rep. Paul Workman as well as Charles Perry, and they were frankly all just incredibly vocal and incredibly provided a tremendous leadership in really moving a lot of positive legislation forward. So we're really pleased he could be with us today. Now, he also serves on the House Committee on County Affairs. Of course, the committees are going to be reconstituted, so we'll see what comes about this session. But he's a strong supporter of limited government, lower taxes, economic development, and personal responsibility. I think many of you know he's been commissioned as an officer in the infantry in the U.S. Army, and he served throughout the world, including from 1987 to 1990 in the Berlin Brigade. He's from Tyler County and maintains a small cattle ranch there. So please join me in welcoming Representative James White.
Well, first of all, I would like to thank Texas Public Policy Foundation for having me here this afternoon, and I really enjoyed you showing up. It's really good when you have good, strong conservative organizations sort of leading the way on the issue like this. It makes it real easy to sell to our other strong conservatives. I always say this, I didn't ask to be on the Corrections Committee last session. I don't think it was on my card. Because I did feel kind of shocked when I was appointed, but shouldn't be a surprise. I do, in my current district, I have 3 facilities, a lot of correction officers running into me in the Walmart, asking whole lots of questions. So with that said, just sitting down listening to real smart people like Mark Levin, I kind of had a heuristic or just a check off of things that, you know, I sort of looked at, and then when I go back home and talk to folks about correction issues, obviously, any of the ideas that TPPF or the Texas Criminal Justice League, I think there you are, right there. Okay, yeah. I usually just had a simple grading rubric. First of all, on that committee, as far as our charges on that committee, I think we had a responsibility to make sure that we maintain safety in our communities. Obviously, we want to expand liberty, and part of expanding liberty is keeping our communities safe. So that was the first question I would ask myself when I reviewed a lot of these great policies. 2, obviously, we want to be able to return efficiencies and be safe and save money. Especially last session, it was really good during the interim when we would go out and talk with various groups of our citizens, and we could say that at least on the Corrections Committee we did our job as far as returning real efficiencies to our state budget and at the same time maintaining safe communities. Obviously, it has to make sense. When I go to Polk County, for example, which over the past few years, for some reason, continues to go through a rash of child molestation cases of a very big nature, I tell my adult probation chiefs I would rather you not bring me any plans that deal with any type of community supervision with folks that are involved in those type of crimes. This doesn't make any sense to the people in Polk County and doesn't make much political sense for me either. And then we need to respect local governing officials. Those are DAs, judges, county judges, county commissioners. It's good to come up with great ideas. It's obviously good to come up with all types of mandates, but we have to understand that we live in a dynamic environment and that we have commissioners and judges, judicial judges, county judges, constables that are involved in this criminal justice environment, and we need to be respectful of the decisions that they make, and understand that they're also charged with maintaining real good, safe environments. One thing I liked about the Corrections Committee, it seems to be a committee based on a lot of evidence-based research. I don't know a time we really sat down and looked at any policy from any of these 2 great organizations that wasn't evidence-based, very researched. Probably not like some of our other issue groups like tax policy. You know, come up with tax policy and then you have all these unintended consequences. I'm sure we get into unintended consequences in corrections, but it was good to see good, solid research that was rigorous and quantitative, and had rigorous quantitative and qualitative analysis. And there were some instances where there was some pilot program that it was rehearsed, and hopefully if they're coming to us again this session, they will again bring us stuff that's evidence-based and very rehearsed. Obviously, as my chairman said, I consider him still the chairman, and we haven't changed anything yet. It's called Committee on Corrections for a reason. As he would say, it's supposed to correct. We're supposed to be in the business of correcting behavior also. And we want to make sure people can be contributors as well as distractors and detractors. When I'm stopped in the Walmart in Woodville or Jasper, people want to know if the folks in the prison are actually doing something gainful, they're learning something, they're learning a skill that they can use when they go out, or do they have opportunities to go to chapel to get their hearts right. Very few citizens just come up to me and say, are you just locking them up and throwing the keys away, except for those that are extremely violent in our communities. And then, most importantly, on the Corrections Committee, I think we're also very interested in having a very strong business economic environment. Obviously, we need to have revenues in order to run facilities and run our probation departments. And obviously, we would like to have more people as revenue generators, not revenue liabilities in our prisons and in our correctional system. So we want a strong business environment, a strong economic environment, and that may also be a encourager to some people not to engage in criminal behavior and become part of our criminal justice system in a negative way. And lastly, we need to make sure that we are fostering we want to, I think on the Corrections Committee, we want to make sure that our communities, our state, is fostering a climate that has a strong cultural, social environment in our state that respects property and respects life, and the idea that that type of discipline, that type of thought permeates down to our population, throughout our population, and in everyday life. So I just want to thank you for having me on this panel, and I always like listening to all the smart people in corrections, and then all I have to do is just sit down and probably make decisions. Thank you all very much.
Well, thanks so much, and I think it's a perfect segue to our final speaker, Ana Yanes Correa, who's the director of the Texas Criminal Justice Coalition, but she has put together a detailed legislative agenda for this session, which in many ways parallels things we're working to advance as well, and I think that this agenda will kind of put some additional meat on the bones we've been talking about so far in terms of how to accomplish the goals that have been so eloquently articulated by our previous speakers. I think many of you know Ana. She's been a fixture around the Capitol in this area, and some of you may not know she recently obtained a PhD, and so that was a great moment, and so she is a brilliant advocate, and I think that the Texas Criminal Justice Coalition has done a great job of bringing together probation department heads, judges, a whole host of stakeholders throughout the state who have an interest in a better criminal justice system. So please join me in welcoming Ana Yanes Correa.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much, Mark, and the panelists. It's a pleasure to be here. I wanted to let you know that I created a simple one-pager of the reforms that have happened for the adult system since 1993, and I included some of the information. Some of you who don't have it, there's information there too. And we also provided a snapshot of where the state of criminal and juvenile justice in Texas from every single area, because as you know, the criminal justice system is so huge, and when you're thinking about how do we improve such a huge bureaucracy, a huge system, we thought that it would be very helpful to provide policymakers who were running for office. Actually, we mailed all of every candidate, Republican and Democrat, during the election time, a snapshot of everything. Juvenile justice, indigent defense, sentencing, probation, diversion, and reentry, as well as some potential solutions that coincide with the three basic core values that we share, which is increasing public safety, saving taxpayers' dollars, and most importantly to us as a coalition, strengthening communities. And when we mean strengthening communities, what does that mean? Economic development, a lot of the things that have already been touched upon. Making sure that we are spending our valuable resources on the people that we're afraid of, as Chairman Mann would always say, versus the people that we're mad at or the people that we're annoyed at. So one of the things that we, when Mark invited me to present here, a lot of you are very knowledgeable about what has been happening in terms of the reforms. And what I would like to bring to today's panel is yes, we have definitely gone a long way. We've gone, I mean, it's incredible that in the history of Texas we were able to close down one facility. It is incredible that the crime rates are going down in all different levels. It's amazing how you're finally seeing meaningful collaboration of practitioners implementing practices that they know are actually going to produce the outcomes that you want. And you know that's hard in any bureaucracy, right? Even if there's a will to be able to implement policies that make sense, they have to know how to do it, they have to know how to track it, and they have to be able to obtain the outcomes for that. So we're heading in that direction, but again, we still have a long way to go. And knowing that the legislature is, it's here, and the fact that we have so many new members, both at the House as well as in the Senate, there is going to be somewhat of a void of knowledge, institutional knowledge that, quite frankly, we must regain as soon as possible so that the reforms that have produced positive outcomes will continue. It's always very heartfelt when I see a report by the Pew Foundation or the Council of State Governments or newspaper articles basically saying Texas is on the right path. And it's always beautiful to see how Texas is doing the right thing and that it's serving all facets of society. I mean, that's the kind of effort and policy that we want to see coming from the state of Texas, and we have to continue to do that. Now, with that, with that reputation comes a huge responsibility. And when I say a huge responsibility, that means policymakers really asking those tough questions. We just released a report today in regards to substance abuse. I mean, everybody knows, at least everyone in this room, I think, would know and agree with that when you have problems with substance abuse, it has to be dealt as soon as possible to reduce the cost. We know that 90% of the people who are currently behind bars are there for possession of the arrests for drugs, are there for possession only. We know that it's costing over $700,000 daily. That's a lot of money that can better be spent in community supervision and in programs that are actually working. We know that there's a lot of specialty courts out there, and the governor's criminal justice division is doing an amazing job right now trying to figure out how do we have the right programs and making sure that we have the right numbers and the right data. And so we commend them for doing that, and they're going to continue to do that so that we can have efficiencies within the system that are serving people with substance abuse problems. But then we also know that there's a lot of gaps. A lot of our elected officials, our judges, for example, they went in it because they wanted to serve justice. They didn't take a class on substance abuse. They didn't take a class on mental health. They're attorneys. Then they ran and then they won. And now they're making this decision that is going to have a huge impact on the lives of people that many of which suffer from substance abuse problems and mental health, right? So what tools are we giving them to make sure that they're given the right, that they're making the most appropriate choices? And that's the same thing with probation. We got to remember that probation departments actually have to listen to their bosses, which are the judges. So that there's that connection. So you can have a probation department that knows how to implement evidence-based practices and risk assessments and all of this good stuff, but they too are also limited in the things that they've got to do, right? And then there's the issue of treatment infrastructure. There's a lot of communities that have been forgotten throughout the years. There's rural communities that don't have anything in terms of substance abuse and mental health. So what are we doing to assist those communities effectively serve the people that they have to serve? So we have a list. So this session, you're going to see a list of policies that are going to be merged in the TDCJ sunset, because that's going to be a big issue next, this coming legislative session. The Texas Department is undergoing sunset. There's going to have some very good recommendations in terms of best practices. So that's going to be a big thing. And then you're also going to have a lot of efforts, hopefully, in regards to addressing the issues that faced by the state jails. And thank you to the report that the Texas Public Policy Foundation recently did on the state jails, and thanks to a lot of the people that have been, in this room too, that have been looking at how do we reduce the recidivism rate as Chairman Madden would always tell me, focus on the success. How do we increase the success of individuals? It's not just about how do you, make sure that people don't go back. It's about how do you make sure that people do become assets to society. That's how we want to start judging and measuring our success. Whether or not they're, the fact that they're not getting rearrested, the fact that they're, having that job and paying child support and just really fully realizing their ability as human beings. I mean, that's how we really want to measure success. So there's going to be proposals pertaining to that. And of course, there's always proposals pertaining to, there's going to be other proposals that are just, quite frankly, Texas is not quite ready to hear, but the dialogue has to happen. And unless the dialogue, begins and we start making some difficult, but not quite some, not as difficult, some people are afraid. Some people are afraid to take various different approaches. They don't like change. And so it's okay looking at data, like Mr. King has demonstrated. It is okay to look at where we can identify the savings, and it's okay to even starting small, even in starting in pilots so that we can track with numbers that jurisdictions can do it, because they can. The interesting thing about it is that in this issue, unlike any other issue, you have a wide coalition of people that want everything that we all want: the increasing public safety, the saving taxpayers' dollars, and strengthening communities. I mean, the religious community, the probation, the judges, the formerly incarcerated, the family members, I mean, the business community that really understands the benefits of having people to provide and to work. And of course, as Shannon would say, the district attorneys. Everybody has a stake at this. And this issue, unlike any other issue, you can really make it happen. So it's just a matter of taking in the agendas and the legislative agendas that are there. I mean, there's over 70 policy recommendations that we can think about. I don't have time to do that. But it's going to happen. It's moving forward. And you have a lot of interest from both Republican and Democrats. So next, we're hoping to have an extremely successful session so that we can continue on this right path. Thank you very much.
We'll open it up to questions, and we've got a microphone here. I did want to ask, Brian, I know you kind of got a little pressed for time at the end. If you could, there was a kind of not an appendix, but almost a secondary study to the time served study, which looked at, I believe, 4 states and did some analysis as to if they had not increased time served by as much for particularly nonviolent offenders, what the results would have been relative to public safety. And I was wondering if you could just kind of talk about that a minute.
Sure. That was what I was mentioning at the end, trying to squeeze in, which is something that shouldn't be squeezed in because it's critically important. One of the things we recognized when we worked on this study was that we couldn't really have a conversation about changes in time served and really be talking about policy recommendations if we weren't able to have a strong statement on the impact on public safety. And there's research out there that points to questionable impacts of additional length of stay in public safety. But what we commissioned was some research using actual release data from Michigan, Florida, and Maryland, so there's 3 states in there. And through some sophisticated statistical techniques of a colleague of ours actually was able to go through and look at taking real people who've been released from prison, real reoffending patterns, and be able to use that data to basically model what the impact would be if you were to, for certain types of nonviolent offenders, as Mark said, if you were to roll their time served back by 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, and give us a real sense of what the proportion of state prison populations that could be affected by this. And we actually found significant portions in these 3 states of individuals who could have been released early, somewhere between 3 months and up to 18 months for certain offenders early, without having any impact on public safety. So we felt that was a strong statement to couple with the conversation about the growth in time served and the costs, to basically say that we're not talking about everybody can get out 3 months, 6 or 9 months early, but I think of the 1.4 million people that are in state prisons across the country, the research seems pretty clear that there are a significant portion of them for who could be released 3, 6, 9 months early without having any impact on public safety. And I would just remind you again of that cost estimate. That 3, 6, or 9 months for individuals, when you look at the cumulative effect across all states, is a significant amount of savings.
So, and of course, relative to what the time served was, as you showed in 1990, it really isn't early if but it's earlier than they would have otherwise been. And of course, Texas is one of the states, as all of you know, that didn't get rid of parole that we have. And that's frankly an area over the last several years, some of our best results have come, well over 1,000 fewer new offenses by parolees. At the same time, the parole rate has gone up. And a lot of that, I believe, is due to the expansion of the treatment programs in prison, as well as improvements in parole supervision. I always tell the story, there's this sign that was on the California parole office, several decades ago that said, "Trail 'em, nail 'em, and jail 'em." And so, of course, there's a legitimate surveillance function to parole, but it's also about helping them succeed. And I think Brian Collier, when he was the head of the parole division, who's now the second in command at TDCJ, that the culture changed. And they also added things like instant drug testing and rapid referrals to substance abuse treatment, restored the parole chaplains. We did in the 2007 Justice Reinvestment Funding. So we've done a lot of really good things in that area. And so I think we can have greater confidence that those individuals that are placed on parole, and the statistics show it, are less and less likely to commit new offenses. One of the things we do have in Texas, of course, though, is that kind of adds another element to the time served thing, is such the wide discretion in our sentencing laws. So, the most common example I give is third-degree drug possession, which is 1 to 4 grams. It's a 2 to 10 years, which can be either prison or probation. And of course, as you would expect, I think there's wide disparities across the state in terms of what someone may get for the same amount of low-level drug possession in one part of the state relative to another. So I think it's something we also need to reevaluate some of our sentencing laws. Well, yeah, one of the issues we'll discuss in the next panel is, I think on average, Shannon, you have the number, on average, doesn't the legislature add 30 new crimes and 40 new sentencing enhancements every session? More. Oh, more than that?
There were 53, right, Shannon, last time?
53 enhancements. And so and we'll get into this in the next panel, but it's kind of seemed like it's a one-way ratchet. And so we need to actually systematically look at all of our offenses and say, is this worse than that? And what is the public safety? Where is our dollars best used for public safety, for keeping those who are truly dangerous in prison for long periods? So I think you've got the microphone. Do we have some other questions here? I think one up here. Thank you.
I can definitely see the logic in trying to cut spending for convicted persons, but I'm wondering if anyone has ideas on how to shorten the time when people are awaiting trial, especially when they're in jail, and we're paying for them to be in jail and they haven't even been convicted of a crime. So any thoughts on that?
Yeah, so right now, 50% of the population at the jail have never even been convicted of a crime, and obviously that's costing, on average, as we all know, the county budget spends a huge amount of their budget at with housing county jail individuals. And one of the recommendations that we have is to really strengthen pretrial services, because there's a reason why they're there, and many of them cannot afford to bond. Many of them they just don't. A lot of jurisdictions do not have pretrial services, and quite frankly, there's a reason. There's interest out there that really, that don't benefit financially from having pretrial services, and so that's one of the. Remember when I was saying we've got to ask the tough questions? That's one of those questions. Is how do we make sure that the people at the county jail are the right people? And we don't feel like just because you can afford it, money should not bear any bearing whether or not you're going to be able to, bond out. There's programs that we've been looking at. For example, the Dallas Prostitution Diversion Initiative, which has been extremely successful. It started, law enforcement started it because they were trying to stop all of the murders of the girls that were being, killed at truck stops. And they decided to create wraparound services for these girls and divert them instead of them having, going to the county jail. Bexar County is also looking at implementing a program similar to that. You know, right now, the county commissioner's been thinking about that. And there's other programs, like there's a really good law enforcement driven program called LEAD that basically identify people with substance abuse problems and do wraparound services instead of putting them at the county jail. That's saving a lot of money. So there's definitely ways. Unfortunately, there's only so many things that you can legislate. A lot of these initiatives have to be county-specific driven. A lot of them, we have to be mindful about the resources that counties have, and just really educate, you know, the chief of police in these counties that all they know also is let's just go ahead and arrest them. So we too have to do a good job at educating about alternatives that minimize that population.
Sure, and you know, there's a bill that we actually worked with Anna and the sheriffs to pass and Jerry Madden back in 2007 that's for citation and notice to appear for certain low-level offenses, including the smallest amounts of marijuana. And not many counties are actually utilizing that, but it's a potential big savings.
Yeah, that's to help with her question. There was a Speedy Trial Act at one time, or Speedy Trial Statute on the Texas books that provided that you know, you had to go to trial. Prosecutor had to take it to trial within 90 days for misdemeanor, 180 days for a felony charge. That was usually ignored, but at least it provided some incentive. And but there were district attorneys that didn't want to be burdened with that, and so they did away with that. Maybe it's time to bring that back. That's a suggestion. The reason is that they don't, the ones that, the rest are that are questionable as to legality are the ones that are most likely going to be put off. They're going to have the actual victim of the so-called criminal justice system take time off from their job, appear, you know, in court, sit there in court, the judge and the prosecutor go through 20, 30 cases trying to get a plea bargain. The ones that don't accept a plea bargain, they're reset to appear again a couple weeks or a month. So in this way, they can kind of bully people into accepting a plea bargain, even if they're innocent. And the prosecutors that are overworked, the judges that are overworked, they'll run through these 20 or 30 people in half a day. And then they go home after lunch. Now, I know because I was a victim of that. I went through that for 2 years and 4 months, waiting for my speedy trial. So this is something I'd like to see addressed in this legislative session.
Sure, well, that's a good question. Let me just say, I think that one of the things that counties need to look at is making sure they have the data on, to look at the people that are in jail after 72 hours, which typically would mean they couldn't bond out because they don't have money, they may be homeless, mentally ill, any number of things. And then go match that up with the courts. And they're doing this in Harris County, for example. And, you know, you can see which judges are not moving their dockets rapidly, and you can kind of see where the bottlenecks are, and at some level, the cost of actually the delay in terms of people piling up in jail because that court is backlogged, they haven't had their hearing, and they haven't bonded out, that the cost of keeping that person in jail who may not be a danger to public safety would be greater than at some point maybe you need to convert a civil court into a criminal court. You know, we have fewer civil cases now because of tort reform. So there's a lot of ways that, but if you don't monitor the data about the real time, who's in jail, and which courts are may have backlogs and so forth. But, you know, of course, they're elected judges and they don't force them, but they do get something, you know, in their email box or whatever from the county criminal justice coordinator letting them know there's this many people sitting in jail whose cases are in your court and so forth. And from a justice perspective, witnesses' memories fade. There's all sorts of reasons why it's important to have an expeditious process, but while at the same time, obviously, taking the necessary care. When you see now with DNA testing, you obviously don't want to, you know, it's like in the news, you should try to put getting it first ahead of getting it right, but I think we do want to strike a balance. Anyone else want to talk about that?
Well, one of my counties, I've sat down and talked with the county judge about this. In many instances, there's a requirement to get some type of enhanced or specialized mental examination, and that takes months to line up, weeks and months to line up. Yeah, a lot of people are saying we're going to look at this in the legislative session, but, you know, I represent 5 counties and 5 different sets of county judges and county commissioners, and they tend to have 5 different sets of supporters. Not like some counties where you just have to work 1 county judge and 4 county commissioners. So, you know, when you get out to a rural district like the one I represent in Southeast Texas, you know, in many instances, moving dockets. I've had a county judge just come and tell me, look, I can't go upstairs and tell independently sovereign elected district judge you need to hurry up and move your docket. You know, he's just at the mercy of that district judge. So, but I think Anna brought up a good point, is giving these counties the type of capacity to deal with these situations. And I think what you'll see laid out over the next few months with some social services and whatnot and some pilot programs, you'll probably see where we can identify some folks that have some mental illness issues, and we can start clearing those people out and moving the dockets a little quicker.
I can tell you from a first-hand experience of someone that I knew got in a situation that they waited almost a year to get evaluated. And so to me, that tells me it's not really the courts, but we got a problem also having people to do these evaluations. We need to spend some more money and have more people to do these evaluations so we can go forward. Again, I think putting money in the front end of a lot of these programs and situations that we have will save us a lot of time and money on the back end.
Looks like Toots.
Following up on what Representative Sheffield said, they really don't do with the people in the prisons the things that they ought to do. And we've finally got some research behind this that suggests that you really have to work with these people who are trained and understand the issues involved and work toward rehabilitation, that sort of thing. Because what happens is in the current system, people are not trained to train. There we go. Awesome.
The Lord is speaking to you, dude.
Unstable population, they're not well trained. We develop a contentious relationship between the corrections officers and the inmates. They get rebellious and cynical, and they stay that way, and they get out that way. That's what we get on the outside. So we got to start off from scratch. But research tells us get your people trained so they know what to deal with. We've got a lot better response out of well-trained people who deal with people. They don't have to train them just to shoot shotguns and take a riot. You train them how to deal with people. It's not hard.
And you've got to monitor the outcomes of those trainings. I mean, and that's for everything. Parole, probation, anybody, case managers. I mean, it's not enough to train. You've got to hold everybody accountable and make sure that they're actually implementing the best practices possible and have data and numbers. We're going to have 2 policies that we're hoping Representative Sylvester is filing that does that specifically for reentry coordinators to make sure that we know that they're doing what they say they're supposed to be doing, as well as parole officers, so that the training can, you know, how do we really know that they're doing real case management? Like, we have to do that.
You're exactly right. I'd like to take a moment and thank Chairman Madden for being here, and thank you for all your service to the House as well, Chairman.